Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. What a blessing it is to be here, to serve the Lord in this capacity. Welcome to the program. I'm glad you tuned in this morning. I'll hope to make it worth your time. We're continuing to read and discuss the book Codeword Barbelon by P.D. Stewart. Get it at luxverbi.org. Good booksellers across this nation. It's a two-book series, Book 1 and Book 2. The first one is subtitled The Sons of Loyola and Their Plans for World Domination. And the subtitle of this edition, the second volume of the series, is subtitled Antichrist is a Woman, Alive and Well Again. The two books together I consider a college education in the Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order and the Jesuit-led Counter-Reformation. Vital reading for Christians, especially today. A revival of Protestantism, the knowledge that all the Protestant reformers had, that the papacy was indeed Antichrist. The Antichrist. Now, at the end of the program yesterday, we read a lengthy quote, a very, very powerful quote, from page 32 of the celebrated work entitled History of the Christian Church by John Dowling. Now, I won't read it again this morning, but I suggest that if you missed yesterday's program, that you might at least go to the archives on First Amendment Radio and at least listen to the last 20 minutes or so of the program yesterday, where I read this quote. Very, very powerful. Professor Dowling, John Dowling, a Protestant historian, marks well the rise of Antichrist. In that quote, he elaborates about the wonderful account of the rapid corruptions of Christianity after the installment of Antichrist. In other words, the rise of the papacy, which grew out of the old pagan Roman Empire to become Antichrist. That power that was restraining the rise of Antichrist was the Caesars of old pagan Rome. And when they left Rome, up in his place stood the little horn, the papacy. And John Dowling hits a home run with this quote, again from page 32 of his work, History of the Christian Church. John Dowling, the author, it should be read in every church in this country. Now, on the following pages, we have a visual juxtaposition. In one artistic rendering, we have the meek and lowly Jesus entering Jerusalem before his crucifixion on the colt, the foal of an ass. And the caption reads, Primitive Christianity, Christ the Master. Christ the Master. And then immediately beneath is another rendering, artistic rendering, of Christ's counterfeit, his counterpart, the Pope of Rome. And he is not meek or lowly. He is not seated on the colt, the foal of an ass, but a giant white steed, an unclean animal, a horse. And he's decked not with lowly attire, but with kingly array, as most popes do, with the papal tiara on his head and being hailed by his followers. And the caption beneath this is, Papal Christianity, the Pope, the servant. And then beneath that, a quote that says, the servant is above his master. And there's no greater juxtaposition in this book than this one, showing the comparison and contrast between Christ and Antichrist. The meek and lowly Christ who gave his life a ransom for many, and Antichrist who just takes life. That is the difference. One a savior, another a killer. Now the author continues, he says, the papacy remains the most enigmatic yet enduring institution on this earth. As I said in Book 1, quote, of all the phenomena of this amazing age, none is more remarkable than the continued existence of a quaint, diminutive kingdom on the banks of the historic Tiber River. Amid the mighty upheavals of the European nations, this mysterious tiny kingdom has remained untouched. The King of the Vatican has continued on his throne with poise and confidence. Despite all the setbacks, no damaging blows have been sustained. The papacy's influence has continued to expand until now a vast host of adherents in every land on earth recognizes his authority. Unquote. That from author S. Maxwell, Great Prophecies of Our Time, published by Tacoma Park, Washington, D.C., published in the Review and Herald of 1940, page 104. The rise of Antichrist and that diminutive but mighty city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Now he says, but of course we know that the theory of the divine right of papal supremacy is a lie, which history shows was the most extensive, the most consequential, and the most impudent fraud ever perpetrated. This fact can be succinctly proven by events which transpired in 1378 after Pope Gregory XI moved the papacy from Avignon to Rome, and Urban VI was elected pope. The French cardinals ruled his election invalid and instead elected a Frenchman, Pope Clement VII. Each of these two popes then proceeded to excommunicate the other, each calling his opponent antipope, which is the same as Antichrist. And I always love to jest, they were both right. Yet both claim to be vicarious filii Dei, which is Latin, which means the vicar of the Son of God. It is the very definition and title of Antichrist. The significance of this title was expounded in great detail in Book 1 to this volume on pages 455 and 460, and I refer the reader to it here. And here we have the words vicarious filii Dei, all in Latin or Roman letters with their numerical equivalents. Vicarious equals 112, filii equals 53, and Dei, D-E-I, equals 501. Together, total 666. The mark of Antichrist, the number of his name. Very, very poignant. And you would think this author was done, but he's just getting started. The next chapter is chapter number 26, if you're following along in the book, page 169. It's entitled Reigning Over the Kings of the Earth. Very, very poignant title for this chapter. And it begins a quote from Revelation chapter 17, verse 4. Quote, and the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. That's right. The woman, as we've already learned in this book, is a typification of a church. In the event of an obedient church, this woman is described as being dressed in white linen. She's described as a virgin, not being polluted by false doctrine and false religion. A woman who worships her true man, okay? Christ, the Lord. But it also, the word woman is used to describe its antithesis too. The woman dressed in red, the one who sits upon the scarlet-colored beast. This woman, wearing the color red, is typical of a harlot. And what do we know about harlotry and whoredom as described in the Bible? It's typification of spiritual infidelity, false doctrine, false worship, and worshiping gods other than the Creator. Spiritual adultery is this whoredom that is described of a false church. Now we'll continue with the text of this chapter. It says, another identifying mark of Antichrist was that she would be closely allied to a male figurehead. St. Paul says that this male mascot would not only, quote, exalt himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, unquote, but he would exalt himself above all kings and governors and would claim all power in the civil magistrate and in matters of religion, too. Like Lucifer, he would seem to say, quote, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High, unquote. Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 14. Now, I am so impressed by this author in seeing the parallels between Antichrist and the power that backs him. The Bible tells us the dragon gave him his seat and power and great authority, and we know that the dragon is Satan, just another name for Satan. And he makes specific reference to Isaiah chapter 14, verse 14. But I want to read the whole passage to make this clear. Before I do, we all know as Christians that God rules and reigns in the hearts of His people. And God moves men by the truth and by the Spirit and by the Word of God. That's why we are the salt of the earth. Our benevolent God is a spirit, and He influences men's hearts and minds and bodies. We accept that, and we know that. But we don't spend enough time to comprehend that Satan also is a spirit who attempts to be like God. And he too rules and influences the hearts and minds of men, but not for benevolence, but for malevolence. Satan is the counterpart of the true, of false, malevolent spirit. And he too imposes his will upon the earth, not through righteous men, but through sinful, wicked men. And Satan made a false prophecy. And many of my listeners may recoil at this, but I declare that Lucifer, or Satan, is a false prophet, if not the false prophet spoken of in Scripture. And now I'm going to read his false prophecy, citing the same passage, Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12 through 15. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12 through 15. Listen to Satan's false prophecy. Beginning in verse 12, he says, How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, here is the false prophecy, I will ascend into the heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Now this is blasphemy. This is usurping God's title, His throne, and His very nature, his right as creator, His rightful place in the heavens, and His rightful place in the hearts and minds of men. And we know this is a false prophecy because of what is written in Isaiah chapter 14, verse 15, the very next verse. This is God speaking now. He says, "Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit." Okay? Satan first is giving his false prophecy, how he will ascend above the heights of the clouds, sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north, ascend above the heights, sit upon the mount of the congregation, ascend into heaven, exalt his throne above the stars of God, and he'll be like the Most High. And God instantly replies, "Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit." That's the judgment proclaimed at that time against Satan. This is the rebellion of Satan, the biblical record of what transpired that got Lucifer condemned, got his name changed from Lucifer to Satan, and got him kicked out of heaven and cast down to the ground, and he's been busy weakening the nations ever since. But he is a spirit, and he influences the hearts and minds of men. Now, who do we know, or who best fits as the one that Satan, the human vessel through which the evil Antichrist spirit of Satan to fulfill this prophecy? Who is the human agency through which Satan is trying to fulfill this false prophecy? It's the Pope of Rome. It is he who has raised his throne into heaven, as we've repeatedly discussed throughout this book so far. He has exalted his throne, the papacy, above the stars of God. Remember, he blasphemes God's name and his tabernacle, and also those who live and dwell in heaven. He says, "I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north." Now, I tell you, in my mind, from my research, that means he is going to sit on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. Now, some may argue, and some may have some very good arguments, and if you please, I would like to hear what you have to say. Email me at tom@seawaves.us. That's tom@seawaves.us. And he says, "I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, and I will be like the Most High." And as we've seen from quotes from popes, papal encyclicals, the official teaching of the Roman Catholic Church, Roman Catholic canon law, everything attests that this papacy is indeed the human agency through which the malevolent spirit of Satan is imposing this, or trying to fulfill this false prophecy on the world. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12 through 15. Read it yourself, and let this really sink to the marrow of your bones. Just like God is a spirit who works righteousness through the hearts and minds of his people, Satan also is a spirit who works his diabolical will in the hearts and minds of his people. And his people is the papacy. That's the message that this author is trying to get across to us, and I'm so pleased that he did. And he continues now, commenting on this fact. Isaac Lansing wrote, quote, "The beginning of the 16th century saw the Roman Catholic Church predominant over all religious, civil, and social life throughout Europe." Now, I'm just going to break that quote to tell you that's precisely what we are seeing in the world today. This is exactly what's happening. The papacy, the Roman Catholic Church, is becoming predominant over all religions, over all civil governments, and over all social life throughout not just Europe, but the whole world. He continues now with a quote. He says, "The Holy Roman Empire with its emperor was in subjection to the Pope of Rome. The civil rulers bowed at the footstools of the papal power, trembling at its threats, and accepted its dictation, unquote. Now mark this well, reader, says the author. Revelation chapter 17, verse 18 says, quote, and the woman, this idolatrous, wicked church, this woman who rides the beast, the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. So it's not just a church, it's also a city. That's a dead ringer. You can't get around it. The Roman Catholic Church is the only church that fits this description. There's no other candidate. It's not just a church, it's a city. Now, says Isaac Barrows, quote, no clearer proof of this can be desired than his arrogating to himself the titles of Supreme Pontiff or High Priest or Sanctissimus Dominus or Most Holy Lord, which belong only to God and to the Lord Jesus Christ, and the language he has held in many of his bulls. That's papal bulls. This is the terms that he uses to describe himself in his papal bulls, arrogating to himself the titles of God. Now he continues, he says, in that, against Elizabeth, Queen of England, speaking of his lordly and godlike power in the church and the world, says, quote, this one he hath constituted prince over all nations and all kingdoms, that he might pluck up, destroy, dissipate, ruinate, plant, and build. Close all quotes. The extent of Rome's claimed dominion was hinted at in an address given by Pope Pius IX to the Italian people on the occasion of the Episcopal Jubilee of 1877. Here's what he said, quote, we 3 millions of subjects, that is the city of Rome, have 200 millions of brethren of every language and of every nation, unquote. Said Cardinal Bellarmine, this is a Jesuit priest, one of the most powerful and respected Jesuit priests in the Roman Catholic Church, Cardinal Bellarmine, the Catholic Church embraces, quote, all places, all nations, and all races of men, unquote. Just proclaiming his power. He has a head office in every neighborhood of this country, and its membership stretches globally. Okay, this is the biggest church in the world, the Roman Catholic Church. And it says, so powerful is Rome that Cardinal Manning said in a sermon given in 1867, quote, the nations not Catholic have among them so many millions of Catholic brethren and fellow subjects that for their own internal welfare and as their external peace, as well as their external peace, it is in their highest interest to protect the head of the Catholic world, unquote. Now, you can take that however you please, but it sounds like a threat to me. In every nation that is not Catholic, you have so many Catholic members of your society that it would do you well to protect the head of the Catholic Church, the papacy. And the implication is, we will rout you. And history attests that's precisely what Rome intends to do. This threatening quote by Cardinal Manning in a sermon that he delivered in 1867, and oh, by the way, this comes only 3 years after Pope Pius IX issued his encyclical and his syllabus of error, which virtually damned America's form of government, its constitution and its way of life, and suggested that the people are to be governed and not to be the governors. Okay? It completely damned our entire form of government and constitution. So, this Cardinal Manning is taking license, rather capitalizing on what transpired just 3 years earlier out of the mouth of the biblical Antichrist at the time, Pope Pius IX. Riding on the wave of the syllabus of error, Cardinal Manning says this: the nations not Catholic, in other words, non-Catholic nations, have among them so many millions of Catholic brethren and fellow subjects that for their own internal welfare, as well as their external peace, it is in their highest interest to protect the head of the Catholic world, unquote. Now, if you can't see that as a threat, I'm afraid you're missing the point. Riding on the wave of Pope Pius IX's syllabus of error comes Cardinal Manning with a direct threat. And what Catholic nation, what non-Catholic nation could he be speaking of? Obviously, the United States of America. And he says, within your country, there are so many millions of Roman Catholics that for your own internal welfare and as well as for your external peace, in other words, if you don't help protect the head of the Roman Catholic world, you will have internal strife and you will have external war. In other words, the papacy can issue an interdict and use the militaries of the world to overthrow this country. That's a direct threat for a foreign invasion. Let me read it again so people get a chance to make sure that I'm not misrepresenting what this cardinal is saying. He says, the non-Catholic nations have among them so many millions of Catholic brethren and fellow subjects that for their own internal welfare, as well as their external peace, it is in their highest interest to protect the head of the Catholic world. Unquote. Where was the outrage from the papacy? Whoa, didn't you overdo it there a little bit, Bubba? No, nothing of the sort. No, it came right on the heels of Pope Pius IX encyclical and syllabus of error of 1864. Direct threat to the United States of America. Now, I wonder if they heralded this threat on Fox News back in 1867. Or the equivalent of Fox News. No. Or shouldn't they herald it today? Shouldn't we be a bit suspicious of these utterings 150 years ago? Do you think maybe Rome still has the same idea? I'm telling you exactly, that's what the Pope intends to do. We're either going to be Catholic or we're going to have internal strife, economic collapse. We're going to have internal and external invasions. We're having Mexicans flooding into this country. It's nothing but a Spanish Roman Catholic invasion. Call it whatever else you want, but it's an invasion of this country. And we're engaged in war all over the world. Now, who foments the wars? I won't get into that, but we have on repeated occasions on this program. Now, the author continues. He says, the dual power, the church and the pope, one ecclesiastical, the other political, had for 1,260 years, from 538 AD to 1798 AD, reigned over the kings of the earth. It ruled thus from its official headquarters, the great Vatican City, over which it has absolute control. Even its own laws are separate and distinct from the laws of the nation of Italy in which it sits. Remember the title of the chapter? That great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth is speaking of none other than Vatican City. It says, in 1874, Cardinal Manning declared that the Catholic Church, quote, alone can fix the limits of its jurisdiction. Let me explain that to you. The Vatican, being the lawgiver of the world, determines for itself its jurisdiction. And we've already seen in the book its jurisdiction includes heaven, the earth, and the underworld. The papacy alone determines its jurisdiction. Quite a cardinal, wasn't he? It's a wonder they didn't make him pope. And he says, so here we see the popes extending their jurisdiction without limit, even unto heaven, and to the very throne of God himself, with great swelling words and pompous words like, quote, the Lord God, the Pope, unquote. We find evidence in the writings of one 18th century historian who identified 95 popes, all of whom claimed to have had divine power to depose kings and emperors. A few examples would suffice. In 1963, historian Walter James wrote that Pope Innocent III, who reigned from 1198 to 1216, quote, held all Europe in his net, unquote. In other words, he reigned over all the kings of Europe. Pope Gregory IX, who reigned from 1227 to 1241, who established the Inquisition and declared that the Pope was Lord and Master of everyone and everything. And it says, note here, readers who wish to learn more are referred to Dave Hunt's book entitled A Woman Rides the Beast, A Woman Rides the Beast, The Roman Catholic Church and the Last Days, published in Eugene, Oregon by Harvest House Publishers, 1994. I've got a copy of that book, and we may get to that one too here on Inquisition Update eventually, Lord willing. So there you have it, folks. He says, Pope Nicholas I, who reigned from 858 to 867, said, quote, we alone, speaking of the papacy, they always speak of themselves in the plural. Remember, Satan has to use men. The Antichrist can't live for thousands of years, since Satan must, as God does, use men to do his will on the earth. He has to use a succession of men, and that man is the Pope, and each Pope is a successor of the other, but they are the one entity, but they refer to themselves as we, always. Now, if I can find my place again, he says, we alone, that is, the papacy alone, have the power to bind and to loose, to absolve Nero. Now, remember, he was the wicked Roman Caesar who burned Rome. He said, we have the power to absolve Nero and to condemn him. Christians cannot, under penalty of excommunication, execute other judgment than ours, which alone is infallible, unquote. There again, arrogating to themselves the power of God himself, the power to bind and to loose one from sins. This is blasphemy. Nuclear-powered blasphemy. You can't blaspheme God any more than this. The author continues, he says, such was the power of the papacy over the leaders of the earth that historian R.W. Southern, president of St. John College, Oxford, was prompted to write, quote, during the whole medieval period there was in Rome, that is Vatican City, a single spiritual and temporal authority, exercising powers which in the end exceeded those that had ever lain within the grasp of a Roman emperor, unquote. So the papacy exceeded even the power of the Caesars during the medieval ages. The author says, what insufferable arrogations. Not only did the popes crown and depose kings and emperors, but they also exacted obedience by threatening them with excommunication and other more earthly punishments. I call this papal thunder. If a king of this earth rebelled against the papacy thundered from St. Peter's Basilica an interdict and commanded that the people rise up against that king and take him off his throne. He seats and unseats the kings of the world. He looses them from their sins, or he binds them to their sins. He is the judge of every man. That's Roman Catholic canon law. Now, for instance, Dollinger states that Pope Martin IV placed King Pedro III of Aragon under excommunication and interdict, and then promised indulgences for the sins of all those who had fought against Pedro, those with him, and his agent, Charles I of Naples. He then declared that Pedro's kingdom was forfeit. In other words, he took him off the throne. Declared that he didn't have a kingdom anymore. And it says, in the end, the Pope's intrigues cost the two kings of France and Aragon their life, and the French's loss of an army. Now then there was Pope Clement IV, who in 1265, after selling millions of South Italians to Charles of Anjou for a yearly tribute of 800 ounces of gold. What is it? Something in Revelation chapter 18, like the last verse in Revelation chapter 18, talks about him merchandising the souls of men. Here's the example in history proving that this papacy is the one being prophesied of in Revelation 17 and 18. He is the seller of the souls of men. It says, then there was Pope Clement IV, who in 1265, after selling millions of South Italians to Charles of Anjou for a yearly tribute of 800 ounces of gold, declared that he, Charles, would be excommunicated if the first payment was delayed beyond the appointed term, and that for the second such failure the whole nation would incur interdict, unquote. Now, for those who don't regularly listen, an interdict, if issued by the papacy, simply closes all the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholics can't be married. They can't get last unction. They can't be baptized. In other words, they can't receive the sacraments. In other words, heaven is shut up against them. The Pope literally closes the pearly gates, as they say. And you know what that does to a Catholic when their salvation depends upon the sacraments of the Roman Catholic Church. That if their newborn child, dies before being baptized, as is taught in the Roman Catholic Church, they go straight to purgatory or hell. So we have a fervor, a religious fervor, with the unction of eternal life, empowering these Roman Catholics to overthrow their sovereign, to overthrow their king. And this literally defines history. Now, he says, at the time of the First Vatican Council in 1869, J.H. Ignaz von Dollinger, professor of church history at Munich, forecasted that Pope Pius IX would force the council to make an infallible dogma out of, quote, that pet theory of the popes that they could force kings and magistrates by excommunication and its consequences, which means eternal damnation, to carry out their sentences of confiscation, imprisonment, and death, unquote. So how much more thoroughly can one reign over the kings of the earth than to be able to threaten them with excommunication and eternal damnation if they don't do what the Pope says? This defines all of history, a history that is lost to Christians today. And here is an artistic rendering of one of the kings of the earth, King John, delivering his crown to the legate of the Pope. Delivering his crown to the Pope. Now, what more subservience can there possibly be? And let me tell you something. Barack Obama is just as subservient to this man of sin, this son of perdition, this biblical and historical Antichrist in Rome, as was King John. And we all know that Barack Obama, if he deviates in an intolerable way against his handler in Rome, he will be JFK'd. Nothing has changed. We see presidential assassinations in this country in a political light, never in a religious one. That is a grievous error. The Pope still reigns over the kings of the earth. That city, that mighty city, that woman, that city, that mighty city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Nothing has changed. And here we have another depiction. Two kings leading the Pope's horse. They worship him as a god. The kings of the earth are required to obey the papacy. Now, says the Catholic professor Orestes A. Brownson, quote, "We grant that the Pope has excommunicated princes and nobles, deposed kings and emperors, and absolved their subjects from their allegiance. We admit that the papacy has excommunicated princes and nobles, deposed kings and emperors, and absolved their subjects from their allegiance." He's all-powerful, not only over the kings, but over the people as well. This from Orestes Augustus Brownson in his works of Orestes A. Brownson, Controversy, Volume 6, published in Detroit by Thorndike Norse in 1884. Oh, the wisdom they had in the 1800s. Page 514. Even the popes have all but acknowledged this fact to be true. Let us give way to Pope Pius XI on this issue. Here's what he said, quote, "The hand of God who guides the course of history has set down the chair of his vicar on earth in this city of Rome, which from being the capital of the wonderful Roman Empire was made by him, capital H, the capital of the world, the capital of the whole world, because he made it the seat of a sovereignty which, since it extends beyond the confines of nations and states, embraces within itself all the peoples of the whole world. The very origin and divine nature of this sovereignty demands that this sacred sovereignty must not be, neither must it ever appear to be, subject to any human authority or law whatsoever, even though the law be one which proclaims certain guarantees of the liberty of the Roman pontiff." The papacy is subject to no one. What blasphemy. And isn't that the kind of arrogance we would expect from Lucifer, the rebel, who was cast down from heaven to the ground and which did weaken the nations and proclaimed that he would exalt his throne above the stars of God and that he would be like the Most High? Is this not fulfilled in the papacy and none other? Again, we have an artistic rendering of the submission of Philip IV to the Pope. What groveling worship they pretend to the Pope of Rome. He says, White says, commenting on another such historical fact, quote, "A striking illustration of the tyrannical characteristic of this advocate of infallibility was given in his treatment of the German Emperor Henry IV. For presuming to disregard the Pope's authority, this monarch was declared to be excommunicated and dethroned. Terrified by the desertion and threats of his own princes, who were encouraged in rebellion against him by the papal mandate, Henry felt the necessity to make his peace with Rome. In company with his wife and a faithful servant, he crossed the Alps in midwinter that he might humble himself before the Pope. Upon reaching the castle whither Gregory had withdrawn, he was conducted without his guards into an outer court, and there, in the severe cold of winter, with uncovered head and naked feet, and in miserable dress, he awaited the Pope's permission to come into his presence. Not until he had continued 3 days fasting and making confession did the pontiff condescend to grant him pardon, only upon condition that the emperor should await the sanction of the Pope before resuming the insignia or exercising the power of royalty. Gregory, elated with his triumph, boasted that it was his duty to pull down the pride of kings. He reigns over the kings of the earth. Though it is true that modern popes have lacked the power to exercise such tyranny today, says this author erroneously, I say, without apology, the papacy and the current Pope Benedict XVI still retain the dogmas upon which past popes have based their brazen claims to rule over and depose kings. If the reader yet doubts that Revelation chapter 17, verse 8 and 18, and the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth, applies to the Church of Rome, then consider this fact. On the papal medal issued by Pope Callistus III of 1455 to 1458, the reverse side reads, Omnes Regis Serviant E. In other words, a direct quote from Daniel chapter 7, verse 27, as found in the Latin Vulgate Bible, which in the Catholic Douay Rheims Bible is translated, quote, all kings shall serve him, unquote. At one time it was declared at the coronation of every pontiff, quote, know thyself the Father of kings and princes, ruler of the world, unquote. Those were the words the Pope assumed to himself and with which he addressed, and it may be still used today, when the tiara was placed on his brow. These words were addressed to Pope Pius IX on his accession to the papacy on the 21st of June of 1846. Know thyself to be the Father of kings and princes and ruler of the world. Catholic priest Phelan had this to say about the Pope's power, quote, to hell with all the governments of the world. Why is it the Pope has such tremendous power? Why, the Pope is the ruler of the world. All the emperors, all the kings, all the princes, all the presidents of the world are as these altar boys of mine. The Pope is the ruler of the world, unquote. Still think Barack Obama is the Antichrist? It's rather laughable, isn't it? So, reader, it could hardly be any plainer that the Roman Catholic Church meets all the characteristics of the woman described in Revelation chapter 17, and further we have shown conclusively from history that the popes, like Lucifer, didst weaken the nations. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. It's a slam dunk, isn't it, folks? It's a slam dunk. And the author's not done yet. Chapter 27 of the book is entitled Above All Gods and Showing That He is God. Begins with a Latin saying, says, Sedit super universum, which is translated, He sits above the universe. This is attributed to the papacy. He sits above the universe. I think we've found our Antichrist. Don't you?